Hey there, we're the West Lot Pirates and welcome to the show. We're here to share our thoughts on Northwestern athletics and college sports with thoughts and analysis from the visceral to the statistical. We run our tailgate with the red pirate flag flying high above as we give no quarter, especially the fourth. I'm Sam Walter.
I'm John Lacombe.
And I'm Eric Skoskowsko.
Well, guys, as we get closer and closer to spring sports, we have a team that is, I would call it a dynasty. I mean, I know they came up just short last year, but I'm talking not about the Kansas City Chiefs, who can just bite me for all I care, but Northwestern women's lacrosse. And, their season starts up in just a few days. And obviously, with the departures of, among others, Izzy Scane, the greatest to ever play lacrosse, and many, many others, it's going to be a different look. So in order to kind of get our minds around what this team is going to look like as they face off here in just a few days, we have the great pleasure to be joined by managing editor of InsideNU, Yanyan Li, and we will get to her right now. We are thrilled to be joined tonight by Yanyan Li, managing editor for the InsideNU site. Lacrosse is right in our, it's right there, and it's wild. Like, spring sports are upon us, and it starts so early, and far be it for us to, pay short shrift to the incredible work that women's lacrosse did last season. So, with the season right here, Yanyan, thank you for joining us. We love to pick your brain a little bit about this team, where they've been, where they're going, because, this certainly from the outside seems like a reload, not a rebuild.
Yeah, for sure. Once again, thank you guys for having me on. I'm a big fan of your work, and I appreciate that you guys bring so much spotlight to not just Northwestern football and basketball, but also to teams like lacrosse and field hockey. I feel like you don't see many college sports sphere podcasts that really go into depth for these non-review new teams. So I really appreciate that.
So we thank you for saying that. We should cop to the fact, though, that we've been doing this a long time, and we definitely started it in a football, basketball frame of mind, and we happen to be privileged to go to to have graduated from a university that has absolutely phenomenal women's sports teams across all these different sports that demanded to be talked about and demanded to be followed as closely as possible. So thank you for saying that, but we are just following the quality of what we're seeing on the field and on the court.
I mean, yeah, as you should.
Yeah, so in this vein, we were all rewinding because we've been guilty in the past, even after we, started giving, particularly like the spring sports, all the coverage and love that they deserve, that these seasons have a way of sneaking up on us really quickly. And, both, lacrosse and softball start in February. They get rocking and rolling. And it feels like, in the case of, we won't not to put the cart before the horse, but when we get into this lacrosse schedule, it goes from 0 to 100 miles an hour in like 2 seconds. But I guess the first thing is, as we previewed it, we all had a chance to climb in the Wayback Machine and go back to the way that last season ended. And it was a punch to the gut, to say the least, to be reminded of how it all went down. But I know in your case, you were in Cary, North Carolina for that championship game. What was your experience, being in that game, especially down the stretch?
Yeah, I was actually just talking to a few of my friends the other day that the lacrosse title game, probably in recent memory, was one of the most painful sports memories that I've had to witness, just because I was there up front and I had to see it all unfold live. And I think, yes, it was because Northwestern did blow a huge lead, but also because that was the final game for so many really important people on that team. Like, people that have been there for 4 to 5 years really were a part of the identity for the team. And to see them go out like that really sucked. It's because before the game, I was at the Northwestern tailgate with some of the parents because I was doing a story on like the Northwestern lacrosse families, and I was talking to like the Scanes and the Kuykendalls, and they were just lamenting the fact that it was their daughter's last game, and they and keep in mind they've been spending their entire life going to the games of their kids, and to see it all end that day and to end in that fashion, like that just sucks. And I was in the press row. I'm usually a very I'm usually a very reactive person when I watch sports, but I obviously couldn't do that as a member of the media. But inside my head, I was just like, what is this team doing? Like, why is this coming apart? But yeah, that was a rough experience, but also a pretty memorable one.
We were thinking. I mean, it's funny you're talking about the parents. I mean, I remember watching one of the videos that Northwestern Athletics put together of Scane and Kuykendall interviewing each other, but I think in the course of the interview, it both came up that like before the I think recruiting rules changed or whatever, one of them committed in like 8th grade, one of them committed in 9th grade. So it's not just that those parents have been watching forever; it's that like Northwestern's been a part of their lives for a decade, and then that it all finished up and it had to finish up the way it did. But right, like you were saying, it was along the same lines. It was certainly sobering for us to look at the roster, and Lord knows we are returning an unbelievable amount of talent, but to be pulling up the stats and looking at the contributions, looking at the All-America list and realizing, that who is walking out the door on this team. So I guess with that said, like we were looking, I guess maybe like a good place to start off before we kind of dive in and go into the individual positions and the players, who's going out, who's coming in. What's your overall outlook? Like what do you think, like having been at that game and having seen what's going out, what's coming in, looking at the lay of the land, like what are your thoughts off the top? Like what's your outlook for this team?
Okay, I will say I am more positive about this team than I was right after last season ended, just because of what happened in the off season. Because I think the main difference for me between last year and this year is that Northwestern's identity is going to change. I don't think the talent has dropped off significantly. Obviously, people like Izzy Scane are like all-time greats, and yes, there will be a drop-off from her, but in general, I don't think that the team has gotten worse. It's just going to be a different type of team, because last year's team was very heavy on these seniors and fifth years. And I think, let me count, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, at least 7 starters that are going to be gone. And Northwestern brought in a lot of new transfers this year, a lot of them being 4th or 5th years, who have the experience that Northwestern needs to continue to be a top team in the country. And I think knowing how good Kelly Amonte Hiller has been with transfers from these mid-major schools, we've seen in the past with Molly Liberty, Haley Radigan, like even though they might not come from powerhouse schools, some of these transfers, they will make an impact with Northwestern coaching, with the Northwestern team. So with the amount of transfers that I think will make an impact immediately, I'm not worried about the talent that will be on the team, but more of how they will gel together and how they will each buy into each of their roles at Northwestern.
I want to ask specifically about the GOAT, Izzy Scane. You mentioned her family earlier, obviously was the face of this team for the last 5 years, 6 years maybe, given the one injury year, etc. Yeah. Northwestern has lost, Twarton Award winners, absolutely epic, huge players in the past. Kristen Gelman, Hannah Nielsen, Shannon Smith, Taylor Thornton. Izzy seems to just kind of stand up above the rest. And I think what struck me so much about her, watching her the last couple of years, was not just the goal scoring, but the way she dictated how other teams operated on defense, and that enabled Northwestern to operate off of that. And I have to think that there was a huge mental advantage to having her on the team. She was a leader for the team, not only in her play, but how she conducted herself on and off the field. I think about that, the season she was injured, and how much of a kind of coach on the sideline role she played in that year, how much, her talking about how much that made her better and understanding the game, et cetera, et cetera. There's no replacing somebody like Izzy, but how are they going to try to replace Izzy this next year?
I mean, yeah, you bring up a lot of great points about Izzy Scane, because even though she really only played for 4 full seasons, she was at the university and she was a part of the team for 6 years. And I think like those 2 years with like COVID and her injury, like those can't be counted out. And this is a whole other topic, but I do have an agenda where I think Northwestern lacrosse should be retiring the number 27, just because you're not going to get a presence like her again. But anyways, just about replacing her, I think something that she brought to the team was this like permeating presence. Like she had so much gravity. Like when you were watching her in previous seasons, like whenever she had the ball in her stick, it was like the entire field gravitated towards her, and she would be like forcing things. And it wouldn't just be with goals, but with setting up her teammates, finding shot, playing on the ride on defense. And I don't think Northwestern is going to replace that. And which is fine, because players like Izzy Scane are once in a generation players. So I don't expect Northwestern to find a player or a system that is like replicating what the offense was with Scane. I think they're good. That's what I was saying before about identity. I think Northwestern needs to build something new, even if it's not the same impact as Scane. I think it's something that will have to be replaced and done differently. And this actually brings me to another point that I wanted to bring up, and that was Madison Taylor. I feel like with Scane gone, more of the attention will be around her. And I haven't really heard that much from the team since covering them in the spring, but Jake Epstein, who writes for The Daily, he did a feature for USA Lacrosse magazine about Nikki Miles, who's one of their Northwestern's offensive transfers. And in that article, the coaches said, besides Madison Taylor, I don't know who else is going to be starting. Nothing else is a guarantee. And to me, it's sort of from that, it just seems like the team wants to build around Madison Taylor, who's a different player from Izzy Scane, but she's also a good player in her own right. I mean, and that's going to lead to a different offensive system.
There are worse players to build around. Let's be honest. I mean, she's phenomenal.
Yeah. Yes, we were talking about the fact that we know this because we know that you also cover field hockey really closely, but Maddie Taylor and Ashley Sessa are quite possibly each going to be the best players in their respective sports for the next couple of years, which is pretty amazing. And obviously, like in both sports, there are a lot of other top players, but both of those players can claim to be the best of the best and are certainly in that conversation. It's really interesting, though, to hear you talking about that. I mean, that's an amazing quote, right? On one hand, right, it's a huge vote of confidence in just how incredible of a player Taylor is and the kind of gravity around her. But I feel like it also speaks to, it's like, for example, we as Northwestern football fans, and a lot of our listeners, have certainly been through many years where past 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, there are certain seasons where we will hear something like, nothing is settled across this position group. And we can't, and that's generally not a good thing to hear. That's experience has told us that's not a positive indicator. But in this case, it feels totally different because it feels like what they're communicating is there's so much talent here. We have so much new talent coming in, be it, first year's transfers, etc., that we have to sort it all out, and like you were saying, like figure out exactly what the identity is. So maybe if we were going to start kind of going position by position here, and working our way through, and you can kind of catch everyone else up on like who's going out, what's coming in, like what does this group look like. And we were thinking that we would start obviously where we know one of the big time transfers is, which is at the backstop. Can you walk us through the goalie situation?
Yeah. Well, obviously, Delaney Schweitzer is a huge pickup for Northwestern. Basically solves the problem at that position in its entirety. And honestly, Schweitzer coming in, that, like, when I heard that news, it wasn't like a relief, like, oh, thank God we have a replacement in goal, because goalie was one of the positions that I was more confident in coming into the season, just because Fran Argentieri, she hasn't really been a starter for the last 2 seasons, but she does have experience playing with the U20 national team, Team USA. So I thought that she would be able to adjust and goal just fine without Molly Liberty. But having a veteran presence like Schweitzer, who at one point was the best goalie in the country, probably was still one of the best goalies in the country last season, just immediately bringing that experience over, that's huge for Northwestern. And basically, with Argentieri, you were going to get that adjustment period, but with someone like Schweitzer, I think she can just come and dive straight into that goalie role.
We were looking through, and I think we were kind of sorting it out, and I don't know to what extent you can speak to this, but it looked like she's coming in. She had a very good last season, but it sounds like the year before was basically like arguably the best goalkeeper in the country. Is that correct?
Yeah, because she was the IWLCA goalkeeper of the year in 2023, which is basically the award that's given to the best goalie in the country. And I don't think she was bad last year. I think her numbers just dipped a little bit. I didn't really watch Syracuse that much, but just from seeing her play against BC in the Final Four last year, she's still a very good goalie. And just being the backstop on a top team, that experience will go very far. But yeah, the 198 saves on a 41.8% save percentage, not bad at all.
Well, I mean, what's wild is like goals allowed average. She outperformed La Liberty last year, and that might be more about strength of schedule and et cetera. But do we has she talked about why she left Syracuse and wanted to come to NU?
I'm not entirely sure. My guess is that maybe it's an academic situation, because she's a 6th-year senior. She had the COVID year, and she also was injured. She started her career at USC actually, and then transferred over to Syracuse. My guess is that she maybe finished a degree with Syracuse and wants to find another place to continue academically. That's my guess, but I don't know entirely.
Got it. That makes sense.
I mean, perhaps she finished up at like the Syracuse School of Communications and then was like, now I want to go to the best journalism institution in the country. Maybe I'll come to Northwestern and go to Medill. That's just me firing shots. I can't, but so, yeah. So the other thing that I'm kind of reading between the lines too, is that with Argentieri, they're also like, that's someone like goalkeeper is absolutely kind of sounds stacked, and if anything, like you're providing more experience for not experience, but even more seasoning for a backup goalkeeper. That it's like not only does our top line talent improve, but our depth improves also. What about defense? Like if we're going through the defensive situation, obviously like some big losses there, but big names back.
Yeah, well, obviously the biggest name returning is Madison Taylor, but I do think defense is the more sound unit in terms of returners, because obviously, Sammy White is a big piece, and I think last year she played while she wasn't fully healthy. She did sit out this a stretch while injured, but this year, hopefully, she can be at full strength for the whole season. And then Jane Hansen, who I thought would be gone, is actually returning for a sixth year because she has that extra year of eligibility from an injury. So that's huge for Northwestern. So those two being in the back line as established players, two of the best defenders in the Big Ten, that's going to be big for Northwestern. I will say that I'm not really sure about the depth defensively because they do lose Kendall Halburn, Carly Mahoney. I do expect to see maybe a bigger role from a player like Madison Smith, who sort of like midfield but does play a defensive role. She started games in the towards the end of last season, but I think she's going to be contributing even more this season. Grace Fujinaga, who is a transfer from Penn, I think she's the main defensive addition for Northwestern that can help solve the problem of depth because she's very experienced, is a fifth year. 2023 second team All-Ivy, was second on 10 with 33 ground balls and had 23 caused turnovers. I think she will be a big experienced addition to the defense. So I think the defense with established players and also maybe possibly some new additions is still going to be very good despite not being deep in terms of experience.
Are there any first years or sophomores, like young players who might, look to step up here on the defensive side?
Well, I did talk about Madison Smith, who is a returning sophomore. But I'm pretty curious about that just as well, just because I felt like last year, besides Smith, there was like a huge lot of first years that didn't really play that much, but we're getting garbage time experience at the end of games. Most of them are on the attacking and midfield side, but I can see a lot of them stepping up. I know Annabelle Mahoney, who is Carly Mahoney's younger sister. She's on the team. She's more of a midfielder, but that could be interesting. But yeah, definitely defense is one of those positions where you could see like first years and sophomores maybe step up more.
So you mentioned the midfield. As we look toward the middle of the field, who jumps out at you as someone who's people may not be overly familiar with, looks to maybe take the next step?
Yeah, for sure. I was actually writing about her in my midfielders preview, which I published last week. Emerson Bowling, midfielder. I feel like she's had a presence for the last 2 years, but she's always come off the bench. Like last year, she appeared in all 21 games, but never started. This year, I think as a senior, might be her time to really get some reps in the starting lineup, just because this team lacks established returners from last year. And I think she provides that. She's a very explosive player. She's known for her speed. She's really good at getting the ball from one field down to the other, contributed in goals as well. So I'm excited to see her take on a bigger role this season.
We know you talked about Maddie Smith earlier, obviously. Sam Smith, just an absolute just stalwart at this position, draw controls, etc. Just a player who I just have to think is just terrifying to have to play against. Like just from just watching in person and on TV. Are there across the rest of the midfield? Like, are there any big transfers coming in at this level?
Not transfers. Well, there is a midfielder transfer. Jalen Roska, who's from Maryland. She didn't really see much playing time in her last 2 seasons, was out with an injury, but she was a top 10 recruit coming in the high school class of 2022. Maybe didn't reach her full potential at Maryland. So it'll be interesting to see if she sort of lives up to that hype at Northwestern. I also do want to talk about Hannah Rudolph, who is Northwestern's highest ranked incoming freshman, was ranked number 10 And the thing that I have my eye on with her, and she's a midfielder, is that she was on that U20 roster with players like Madison Taylor, and she was one of the youngest people on that roster coming out of high school. She made some contributions. I think she had 8 goals and 10 assists. I think maybe that or the other way around. But either way, she contributed numbers. And I think having that experience playing alongside some of the best players in the country, like Madison Taylor, Shea Dolce, Emma Lapinto, um, all of these like other established collegiate players. I think that's gonna do her a lot of good. And I think out of all the freshmen, like I see her being the most likely to start on day one. It was 8 goals and 11 assists.
She's listed at 5'11", which, based on just some cursory double checking, like I've confirmed that's pretty tall for the team, which I have to think is going to be an interesting, like, unique advantage, especially as, you know, she's taking some angles on shots, etc. But I totally agree with you on the value of that playing experience with other members of the team, particularly Taylor, if that's who, you know, the offense is presumably going to go through, and that chemistry is like the number one thing you're looking for as you know, you're trying to draw up those cuts to the net, etc. So. How about shifting to the attacking side, Madison Taylor's position? We've talked about her a little bit as well. There's also a couple of big transfers coming in. Another pair of sisters, it looks like.
Yeah, Nikki Miles and Jordan Miles. I actually did a sort of tape study on Miles when her transfer was first announced, and I think she's the transfer I'm most excited to see. I think she's the transfer that I'm most confident about in terms of starting, just because she played such a huge role at UPenn, was their main draw taker, which that will be interesting because of the role of Samantha Smith. It'll be interesting to see if Miles continues her role that she had at Penn, or if she's gonna maybe step back and focus on attack, or if they're gonna split between the two players. But something that I really liked about Nikki Miles is that she sort of has the Scane-like ability to create her own shot, sort of like, I don't know, sort of like a point guard in basketball. And obviously no one's going to replace Izzy Scane, but having a player that's able to do that is just so valuable. I was watching her highlights actually when Northwestern played Penn, even though Penn didn't really score all that much in that game. Like, the way she was trying to get to the goal from all the way far out near the midfield and driving into the goal, I really liked what I saw from that, especially since I think that's one of Madison Taylor's not necessarily weaknesses, but I feel like with goals that Taylor scores, it's more just up front, direct, one-on-one, but whereas I feel like a player like Miles and score from further out, and I think the two will complement each other pretty well.
You speak of complementing each other. I mean, we think back to last year. Obviously, you got the Scane train, but that would go nowhere without the conductor, Aaron Koinkendall. Do you see someone as able to step into that kind of number 2 role alongside of Taylor?
Well, I think most likely the number 2 attacker will be Miles, just based on her repertoire as an All-American, Ivy League attacker of the year. But there's also going to be some other players that are going to be putting up big numbers, like Nikki Miles' sister, Jordan, who comes from High Point. She also put up really good numbers, was maybe a big fish in a small pond at High Point. I don't know how much of an impact she'll have compared to her sister, just because the level of competition that she faced at High Point, not the same as Big Ten or Ivy League. Another player is Riley Campbell, who's from Harvard. She scored 60 goals last year. Fun fact, she's actually from my hometown, so Madison, New Jersey. So there's that. But I think she's another player that put up big numbers. So it's a lot of these Ivy League major players that had huge offensive roles and huge amounts of experience that are really taking it to the next level. And it will be really interesting to see how they translate. And we've seen players like these translate before to the next level, most notably Haley Radigan. So I think Nikki Miles is the one that I think will make the most impact immediately, but I think there's a lot of other transfers with potential.
It's so funny you took the words out of my mouth, because when in an individual way, when you were talking about each Miles sister, I was like, you were like, well, Nikki Miles, a transfer who's coming in, and I really noticed, she can get her own shot and she could kind of stand out right away. And I'm like, that's exactly what Haley Radigan did. And then you were like, and then Jordan Miles, like transferring in from High Point, I'm thinking, yes, smaller Southern school transfer comes in, lights up the net. I'm like, I'm hearing Haley Radigan twice here, which not to put pressure on the Miles sisters, but something that I wanted to, and I know we'll probably be pivoting to this when we talk about the schedule, is you mentioned all these transfers, and it truly is a major amount of transfers coming into a team that already is loaded with talent. And I guess we're conscious of the fact that a lot of our listeners maybe aren't familiar. Like, you're hearing all these names and you're like, all right, but like, if this was college football and you were like, yeah, we have a player coming in from Alabama, a player coming in from Georgia, it's like when we're talking about two big time transfers coming in from Penn, goalie coming in from Syracuse, like player coming in from Maryland, like in the current preseason poll, these are the number 10, 11, and 12 teams in the nation. Like, these are big time recruits to be getting in. But maybe along that vein, like, you're talking about this team, obviously there's going to be a lot of scoring. Obviously there's going to be a lot of flux here. And well, not necessarily flux, but like you were saying, forging a new identity. How do you see that identity? Like, when you look at what Northwestern has, and then you step out and you look at the rest of the best in women's lacrosse, how do you see the Cats stacking up?
Well, I think Boston College will definitely remain the number one team in the country, just because of the amount of talent, returning talent that it has. Even though the team lost the NCAA 2024 Most Outstanding Player, Kayla Montello, they returned Shea Dolce, who I think is the best goalie in the country, Rachel Clark, Emma Lapinto. These are all three Tewaaraton Award candidates, in my opinion. And just BC was already stacked last season, but this season, Northwestern lost a lot of this top talent. BC did not. So I think they will still be the team to beat. But another team that will be very interesting to look at is North Carolina. The Tar Heels weren't as good as they usually were last season, because a lot of players were injured, most notably Chloe Humphrey, who was the number one freshman last year. She had an injury, but will be back this season. Actually, there was like a fall ball scrimmage where the U20 Team USA team played against Northwestern in 2023, where Humphrey scored 5 goals on last year's Northwestern team, which is scary. So I think a UNC team led by her and other top recruits. UNC has Eliza Osborne, who is the number one recruit of this incoming freshman class. Like, they're going to be a team to watch. But the thing is, Northwestern, with its additions, it can also compete with these teams. It's just going to be different.
Well, great news. We get to play every one of those teams you just mentioned.
Right.
And most of them at home. This schedule is a bear, as it often is for the LAC squad. I mean, Kelly Monte-Hiller, I think some of it is the Big Ten, some of it is by design, but Notre Dame, Boston College, Syracuse, North Carolina, Marquette, Johns Hopkins, I guess that's a conference team, all on the schedule. It feels similar, but are there any major differences here we should be thinking about or having our eyes peeled for as the season kicks off in 10 days, 11 days?
I don't really see much of a difference. I think Northwestern, Kelly Monty-Hiller is always really good about scheduling difficult out-of-conference opponents. Basically, I think all these opponents are possible. I don't think there's a single opponent that Northwestern, like you see that they could potentially face in the Final Four that they wouldn't be facing in the regular season. And credit to Kelly Monty-Hiller for giving Northwestern these challenges. I do notice that there's more home games than away games, and most of the big games are at home. And actually, when I was doing my article about like Northwestern lacrosse games that you should mark on your calendar, literally all of them are home. And I don't know if that's by coincidence, but it's great for Northwestern fans because they get to see BC, they get to see Notre Dame, Maryland, North Carolina, Michigan. Like, these are all really big regular season games, and all of them are at home. So that's great for Northwestern.
It looks like just like very, very roughly 7 non-cons and 5 of those are at home. Some of that has to be just the quality of the indoor facility that Northwestern has. I know Notre Dame has one as well. Northwestern opened the season there last year, or I guess they played game 2 there last year.
Didn't go great.
Yeah. But I guess like that is a nice advantage that we get to play these teams. We get a chance to I think the intent, as you alluded to, Kelly Monty-Hiller scheduling these big teams, it builds confidence in the team. They're playing the top talent from the word go, and it's in preparation for what they're going to have to face come tournament time.
Yeah, definitely.
We were one of the other things that we were talking about, and this is obviously something that everyone's had their eyes on ever since the kind of insane miracle that was the Lakeside Field came to fruition this past, I guess, like really summer and into fall. And then everyone was looking and being like, hey, Lacrosse is going to actually get to use this facility also. When the schedule actually came out, there are only, at least this season, 2 games at the outdoor facility at Lakeside Field. Now, the following season, potentially quite a few more. But looking at this schedule, I mean, you were talking about, and I think one of the things that a lot of us, we were right at the top of the list, but a lot of things that people are looking at is, with this expanded stadium and us having an unbelievable team, a chance to potentially set attendance records or be looking at setting women's lacrosse attendance records nationally. Obviously, like we've got Oregon, April 13th, which is a Sunday, and you've got Michigan, which is Thursday, April 17th under the lights. Like, what would you say, what's your prognosis as you look ahead to those games, like in terms of the national lacrosse landscape and Northwestern's ability to pull in attendance figures?
Ooh, okay. So I know that I like to talk about lacrosse and attendance records, but I think the reality is that Northwestern fans, like, as good, okay, don't get me wrong, I love dedicated Northwestern fans, but even with more popular sports like football and men's basketball, like, the team still has to rely on other fan bases to set attendance records or to sell out its stadium. Like, when you go into Welsh Ryan Arena, like, obviously the student section is amazing and people are like fighting to get seats in the student section, but the rest of the stadium is still fans of other local Big Ten teams. And I think with lacrosse, like, I just don't see, like, the team setting revolutionary attendance records in the way that it may be set if the team played in, like, Maryland or some, like, lacrosse hotbed. And I know we're going to get to this when we talk about Northwestern hosting the NCAA championship. But, yeah, I just, like, I'm trying to keep my expectations low just because of that. But I do think it would be awesome if we would set attendance records, even if we're not having, like, 12K people in the stands. Like, maybe, like, because the capacity of Martin Stadium before that was 2,000. Just even having like 3,000 or 4,000 would still be an amazing environment, especially that Michigan game because you have the Midwest opponent and a lot of Michigan. Because look, in lacrosse, like the families travel everywhere. I feel like more families of like the players on the opposing team and just that like local Midwest audience. And I think that could be a big spot.
I'm just curious, Yanyan, if you know if there are any changes or alterations to Martin Stadium from what we saw in the fall for the spring, these two games and anything else that might be happening on the lake, or is the stadium going to look identical to what it did when the football team was playing there?
Not that I know of. I think it should be the same. I really hope they keep the press box open because I would love a proper press box.
So I mean, like that means the high watermark would be 12,000, right? I mean, presumably you could fit that many people in. I hear your point that that's probably unlikely to occur, but it's one of the things we were really excited about. John, I think you said this earlier that when that stadium went up, realizing the potential for an incredible environment come springtime. So we will certainly be doing our part to try and help pack the place.
One thing we could do it USC style, USC football style. Just put a giant purple Izzy Scane tarp jersey over like the whole north stands, and stylishly get rid of that many empty seats. But it's funny, Yanyan. You made the great point in your piece that you wrote when Northwestern first got the tournament, the 2026, which if we hadn't specifically said this yet, like you alluded to it, but Northwestern at that Lakeside facility is going to be hosting the 2026 NCAA lacrosse tournament. And obviously, like beyond even this season, I think a lot of us immediately looked, partially because one of the obvious reasons that there are only 2 games outside of this facility is like it doesn't warm up until a certain point in time. And May is like definitely a much better target weather-wise for games. And the Big Ten tournament, last season or the season before this past season, what am I thinking? This past season being a great example of that. But in your article, when Northwestern was first awarded that, you made a great point, which was relative to lacrosse draws, that you said when you were in Cary, even in North Carolina on the East Coast, but outside of the Northeast, if North Carolina wasn't playing, you even saw the attendance figures drop off a lot there, right?
Yeah. And I think I do want to add in the qualifier that Cary, North Carolina is not a very
fair.
culturally popular place.
Yeah, Chicago of the Southeast, they call it.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
I think the tournament was only hosted there because of the convenience of because it was played at the NWSL Stadium for the North Carolina Courage. So I think just like having that stadium there was convenient, and I think that's why. But it's not maybe Chapel Hill nearby, but not Cary.
But at the same time, you have made the great point that as much as things are shifting, the Northeast is the traditional power base for this sport, and that right. Like you hopefully that you will get a lot of fan bases traveling out for the game, or at least relative to the Midwest. If you have a Northwestern, you have a Michigan, etc., you'll get the alumni bases showing out. But at the same time, we very much hope we will do anything we can if they're to help put together a formal pack the place bid, whether it be Oregon this year, whether it be Michigan this year, and maybe Michigan. I think when it first came out, like our eyes immediately went to that Oregon game, but because it was on the weekend. But a Thursday night under the lights for lacrosse would be pretty incredible. So what's your prognosis for how you see this season starting off, because obviously we said it's going to be starting off with an absolute bang. I mean, it is just heavy hitter after heavy hitter right out of the gate. Like, how do you see the Cats hitting the ground here as things get started?
Well, I first want to start off by saying I feel like it would be really cool if there was a Pack the Place campaign, especially since that Michigan game could have big postseason implications. We saw last season Northwestern's game against Michigan basically decided the Big Ten regular season title. And I think that could be the case this year. I think Northwestern and Michigan are the top two teams in the Big Ten. Michigan's returning over 70% of its offensive production. And I think, that game with the big stadium, under the lights, high stakes, that's a perfect game to be campaigning. And to your point about the season and its start, Notre Dame will be a very interesting matchup for both teams because Notre Dame is sort of in the same position as Northwestern, where it has to forge its own identity again because it lost its three best players in Madison Aarons, Jackie Wolak, and Casey Choma. Those three players were three of the best players in the country, and Notre Dame, like Northwestern, will have to forge a new identity. Both teams are two of the best teams in the country. Both teams facing the same situation. That's a Friday night matchup on February 7th. Also known as Izzy Scane Night, as the Northwestern Lacrosse Instagram posted about. They're going to be honoring Scane at that game. Still think they should retire her jersey, but anyways, I need to stop bringing that up.
Hey, maybe they will. Who knows? But that's awesome.
Yeah, maybe I'll write an op-ed about it. Who knows? But yeah, just speaking towards how Northwestern will start the season, I do think there will be an adjustment period. How that will translate into, I'm not so sure. I have to see this team play to see, but I think there's going to be a perfect mix of like winnable opponents versus more challenging opponents, because after Notre Dame's going to be like one of those challenges, but then you have Canisius, and then you go straight from that to Boston College and then Niagara. So it goes like hard opponent, easier opponent, hard opponent, easier opponent. So I wouldn't be shocked if we see some ups and downs, but I do think eventually this team will get into a groove and contend to be one of the top in the country.
Yeah, it's definitely tough, with that rough early start to kind of find your rhythm and kind of get into it. But as you mentioned, having a few of those, I mean, we don't want to call them cupcakes, but when the frosting is nice and creamy and you can really get a sense of who you got, that's definitely helpful off the top. Before we let you go, you also do cover swimming and diving for Northwestern, and that is, those are two words that I don't think we've ever said on this podcast in the 14 plus years we've been doing it. So, for our own knowledge, I mean, can you catch us up to speed on Northwestern swimming and diving?
Yeah, of course. I write for InsideNU. I cover Northwestern swimming. I also write for SwimSwam, which is like a big swimming and diving news outlet. So I've covered a ton of swimming, probably the sport I know the most about. But Northwestern, I like where the team is at. And you have to think about Northwestern swimming in a different context compared to lacrosse, because this team is not expected to be a national contender. Swimming is a very top-heavy sport, so very far from teams like Virginia and Arizona State, Texas. But Northwestern is coming off of a meet against Wisconsin, and that was actually a pretty monumental meet because Wisconsin is ranked number 12 on the women's side, number 18 on the men's side. One of Northwestern's toughest Big Ten opponents during the regular season. But the men's team had a big 163.5 to 136.5 win against the Badger men and actually beat the Badgers for the first time since 2013. So that's almost like Northwestern men's basketball's losing streak in State Farm Arena. Like, that's how long it's been. sorry to bring that up.
Wow.
It was an analogy, but yeah, that's a big thing.
No, but I mean, it is a great point. And I mean, it's great to get a piece of knowledge like that. Again, like I know we are, like Sam said, we're speaking for most of our listener base when we just like, this is not a sport that people just know as much about. And it's great to be able to know something like that. It's like, great. Now you as a Northwestern fan that tunes into, right, a certainly right football and basketball dominated pod, you now know, thanks to Yanyan, that Northwestern swimming notched a huge victory over Wisconsin swimming a couple of weeks ago, which is awesome. Who are Northwest? You know, if we were going to highlight again, like who are Northwestern's top swimmers that a Northwestern fan should know about?
Definitely keep an eye out on swimmer Stuart Seymour, because he's a sophomore. He is particularly good at the 100 backstroke. He saw a huge improvement in the event this season and could be in contention to qualify for the NCAA championships individually. And that's pretty big for Northwestern because I believe it only had 2 NCAA qualifiers last season. So I think him and Diego Nostak, who is also a sophomore, broke the school record in the 200 butterfly. I don't remember if it was the 200 butterfly or the 400 individual medley, but he broke school record. Also going to be in contention to finish top 8 at Big Tens and qualify for the NCAA championships. And then on the women's side, there's a few transfers that Northwestern got. Nikki Ivanema from Princeton, she's one of them, could also qualify for NCAA. So yeah, those are some of the swimmers that you should be looking out for.
We'll definitely keep an eye out for them. Yanyan, thank you so much for taking the time to jump on with us. Like I say, really, really appreciate your knowledge and your depth of information. And as we get into the spring and kind of get a sense of, is it the revenge tour or moving on from the greatest lacrosse player ever to play, and see Northwestern kind of taking the next step into the future. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for helping us get a better sense of what's up, and we really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I really enjoyed my time on here talking about lacrosse. It's getting me excited for the season. And I appreciate all the work that you do.
Just a few days away. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, we're at the end of January, and we're talking about spring sports just a few days away.
Yep. Real quick before we wrap, I'm going to throw this out there. Conspicuously, between jersey numbers 1 through 36, there are only 2 numbers not represented on the current roster. One is number 12, one is number 27.
There it is.
Interesting.
Yanyan, if it happens, we're going to say that it was because you said it should happen.
Yes, you get 100% of the credit on that.
So true. I mean, Northwestern's only ever retired 1 number in all sports, and that was Billy McKinney. Personally, I think there should be more, but if there's one else, it should be Izzy Scane.
That'd be pretty cool.
Thank you again so much for coming on, and go Cats.
All right, yeah, go Cats.
If you or a loved one is seriously injured by someone else's negligence, hire Kent Simpson of the Simpson Law Group. After over a decade prosecuting murder cases in Chicago, Simpson opened his own firm focused on wrongful death and personal injury cases. He specializes in car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and other transportation accidents, as well as construction accidents, medical negligence, slip and falls, product liability, and more. Millions recovered for clients. No fee unless he wins. The Simpson Law Group. Compassion, empathy, and vigorous advocacy. Go to simpsonlawgroup.com or call 312-332-2107 for a free consultation. And go Cats. Well, once again, that's Yanyan Li, the managing editor for InsideNU, covers lacrosse, swimming and diving, as she mentioned, but really great stuff. And I mean, I'm so excited to see where this team goes and get out to Lakeside Field, maybe even get out to a game in Ryan Fieldhouse, which I still to this point have never laid foot inside.
And they are coming fast and furious too. I mean, this is the thing, we talked about it during our interview, during this preview, is we've and we know a lot of you are thinking this way too, but you're in the middle of basketball season, and then lacrosse season sneaks up on you so fast. I mean, we are sitting here recording on January 27th, the day after Valentine's Day. Northwestern and Boston College meet in Ryan Fieldhouse in what will be one of the biggest NCAA sports moments of the entire spring. And it's 2 weeks and change from now. It just comes flying up. So, yeah, I mean, it was awesome to talk with Yanyan. She is obviously knows so much about these teams. Get over to InsideNU. As much as she talked about here, she's writing up these previews position by position, but that are even more detailed. I think her midfielders one is already up, and you'll just everything you would want to know about this team, like it's all right there. So yeah, we are super lucky to have journalists like Yanyan who are covering these teams at this level of depth. But it was awesome to have her on.
I guess we need to at least briefly mention the basketball game that happened over the weekend. I mean,
yeah,
only insofar as that we went down to Champaign and kind of got whacked a bit. But
it happens.
Yeah,
I believe we lost by 30 last year down there.
Right.
Yeah, I mean it wasn't as bad this week, but
that's the thing is, look, certainly not going to butter you up here, right? I mean, it was not a great performance, and frankly, really, it was as close as it was through a bizarre but well earned set of events really quickly that shaved a lot of points off of the score line really fast late. But yeah, as Scuzz alluded, Northwestern's gotten its ass kicked down in Champaign in basketball a lot of times. This is something that happened last year in a series that again, right, that Northwestern has done very well in, at least very recently, right, over the past couple of years. And yeah, it's like on the road against the very best teams, but particularly in State Farm, the ass kickings are out there, and you don't want it to happen. But I'm also certainly not willing to be like, see, like this exposed like a huge flaw. It's like, I don't know, man. Like, we know what the weaknesses of this team are. It's just the games down there tend to go like this.
Yeah, I think the difficulty now is like just winning the rest of the home games probably ain't going to do it for the Cats.
Right.
And so where are they going to pick something up, right?
Yeah.
Is it at Oregon? That's pretty tough.
Oh, yeah.
Winning at Ohio State, at Minnesota, those are not good teams. Those are two reasonable opportunities. I guess Ohio State is kind of in actually, they're both kind of neck and neck with us in the standings now. So I take that back. So like it's at Maryland, maybe at the end of the year is the best chance for a solid, road victory beyond that Oregon game. So the pathways to the tournament are few and far between, and it makes games like that Michigan game, like that Penn State game, sting even more. But yeah, like John said, we know that this team is a bit up and down, and they've got some difficulties. At Brooks in particular had a really tough game against Illinois. Only played 26 minutes as a result. You got to wonder.
I mean,
if
he landed face first from the rim few days prior.
Yeah, I mean, he looks like he was 2 days out of a boxing match,
right,
going to that Illinois game. So I think none of us are trying to sugarcoat where this team sits for the season, but there's also no value in reacting strongly to this Illinois game.
And again, we got crushed on the glass in this game. Crushed. Like, we almost got doubled up. And that's not great. It's not, I mean, that's a problem. And obviously Illinois is really strong in that situation. And it's a weakness of this team. But part of the reason we harped on the officiating so much over the past couple of weeks is like, this is like we were saying, an imperfect basketball team, but a team that does some things really, really well and has a ton of heart and a ton of pedigree and a ton of just defensive discipline and all of these good qualities that help make up for a lot of the flaws of this basketball team. But the bottom line is this conference is so flippin' good that you're just what that all adds up to is you're just going to be in a ton of super tight knockdown dragouts that you need to have. And in the case of Northwestern, or like on the road at a Purdue, like we saw earlier, like you're going to have times where it just doesn't go well for you, and where a situation where your failures to be able to get rebounds do just spin out of control and become like a really big thing. But obviously, right, like we got 3 points out of Brooksy in this game. Like, do any of us think that that is in any way indicative of the way the rest of his season's going to go? No, of course not. So, yeah.
It's worth mentioning we matched Illinois on rebounds when they played in Evanston.
Right.
And again, I'm not trying to, like, wash this away, but, like, to watch that game in a vacuum chamber and come out, like, thinking this team is you know, wet trash is like that recency bias is just it's doing a disservice to what we've seen on the court with our own eyes thus far this year. So, and yeah, they got to play better than they played against Illinois, full stop. But they're certainly capable of it. So we'll see. You know, they've got Rutgers, very winnable game this Wednesday at home. Show up, show out, get loud. We've talked about that ad nauseum. And we'll see these guys, you know, get back in the win column.
I think too, like, again, like, I don't want to diminish this because obviously, like, making the tournament the past 2 years is absolutely fantastic. Like, all-time sports moments for any Northwestern fan. And making the tournament should always be, like, a goal. But I don't know, like, that it's I don't know. I just feel like coming out of the past 2 seasons, and again, I'm not trying to diminish what the goals are here, but that, like, they're very much being defined like either we make the tournament or we don't this season. And I'm like, I'm watching a good basketball team every time this team plays, and sometimes it doesn't go their way, and sometimes, like I said, like they get fed into the paper shredder, like this game at Illinois. But like where, you know, we haven't swept Illinois since 1966 in a season. So like, really? I mean, again, like up against history like that, it's like whatever, man. Like whatever with this game. I just know I'm watching a great basketball team every night that's got like big time players who like people go, you know, you travel and you go to Welsh Ryan, you're like, man, I get to watch Brooks tonight. I get to watch Nikki tonight, right? Like this is a big time team with a big time identity that is capable of, it's particularly at home, capable of beating any team in this conference on any night. We all know that. And if at the end of the season that doesn't end in a tourney bid, that shouldn't invalidate everything that we know this team is. And again, that's why I kind of have my side eye on the NIT even now. Not because I'm giving up on the chance to get into the tourney, but I'm just like, I just feel like this team would walk into that tournament and then just start doing damage because like it's such a strong team with such a deep pedigree. But again, we'll see how it all ends up. But I just know like game to game, like this team's just awesome, man. Like it's like the results between things that we deserve not going our way and just like how tough it is to win in this conference. Like the record isn't quite where we want it to be, but the team is really special. And like, again, I think we're all still very excited to see game to game where this is all going to go.
Yeah, you mentioned Rutgers on Wednesday. Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, we need to take care of business in our own house because that's just in this league. That's what you got to do.
One guy that I wanted to mention in this game, and again, like there aren't many guys pulling superlatives out of this one. Like again, like this was not a pretty basketball game, but KJ Wyndham, particularly really late in this game, really showed something. This is a really young, obviously raw player, but a player with a ton of potential. And he displayed some really great energy and really good defensive awareness late in this game. There was that one steal that he had really late. I mean, this game was bizarre because, I mean, Northwestern was down by more than 20 points, and then they sort of shaved it to a point where it was most all the starters were on the bench. Both the teams were going through the motions, but it was just hovering around 10 or just under 10. And then the Cats, or just over 10. And then the Cats shaved 7 points off it in like 2 seconds, right? With like a 3 and then a steal. Barry goes down for the layup, but then Wyndham, with an unbelievable bit of defensive awareness, trails that layup and then immediately steals the inbounds pass. And it happened so fast that the announcers barely even realized that it happened. And then it like bang, bang, and suddenly puts it in, and Northwestern's gone on a 7-0 run in like 2 seconds. So, and then, they almost got a steal at the other end, which I don't think there was ever a chance of a full comeback, but it was Wyndham really playing with 100% effort in a game that had basically been decided like late. I mean, and again, in a game where there wasn't a lot going right, he showed something in those final moments.
Anything else to mention before we get out of here tonight?
We were talking about a transfer, so to speak, not from in terms of players, but it is another transfer from South Dakota State, and it is a coach, Ryan Olson, who was South Dakota State's offensive line coach and offensive coordinator. He replaced Zach Lujan as SDSU's offensive coordinator. He is coming to Northwestern this coming season to be what we think is our assistant offensive line coach, which I think, first of all, says some interesting things about the changes that have happened in the coaching rules, right? And then also kind of where South Dakota State is at this particular point in time.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with the coaching rules, it used to be you were limited to 10 on-field coaches, or 9. I forget the exact number.
9 or 10. I think it's flip-flop back and forth, I believe.
Yeah, and those rules have been eliminated or just severely relaxed. I forget what the new rule is, but this basically this is a coaching ad that doesn't really impact. In the past you had to shift things around, and maybe you had a coach, or somebody that was part of the staff that was on a non-field role. So I'm forgetting the name of the guy in Braun's first year that
Skip Holtz.
Yeah, Skip Holtz was an assistant coach in Braun's first year, but he was not an on-field coach, so he could not actually coach players, but he manned up all the recruiting and kind of a lot of the program administrative stuff that Braun just hadn't done and didn't really exactly have time for in that 2023 season. So those rules have changed, and everything we're hearing is that this is effectively 2 guys focused on the O-line, which is maybe not a bad thing given how important that position group is going to be to Northwestern's success this next season.
And you fold in that Northwestern has, an FCS All-American offensive lineman coming in that obviously Olson has a ton of familiarity with, a wide receiver that Olson also has a ton of familiarity with, and then Olson has familiarity with Lujan. They all have familiarity with each other. Like, there is this amazing bit of pull and chemistry that is going to be coming in with all of this. And also, again, as we were saying, like, it stinks, and we are for sure, I mean, it doesn't stink for us. We are for sure benefiting from it. But in the FCS era, where the highest level of FCS football, a bunch of those guys are fringe FBS players. And if they have a great season at the FCS level, could have an eye on the FBS. And then you have a coaching change like SDSU had. Suddenly you have a bunch of coaches kind of drifting, like you have 20 players or however many players going into the portal. You have suddenly coaching staffs on the move, and everyone's trying to figure everything out. And South Dakota State was just a program very much in flux right now, and Northwestern has benefited with several really high-grade football players and a big-time coach who's being added to our staff. And again, right, you're talking about a team that was one of the final 4 teams standing in the FCS playoffs. The offensive coordinator for that team is now maybe our assistant offensive line coach or an advisory role. And he probably won't be that for more than a season because he's frankly overqualified for that position. But we're massively benefiting from it, and I'm happy that we are.
Also, one last little bit of news. we don't talk much baseball, and I think that might change a little bit. Obviously we didn't talk softball at all this week. Softball's coming up. We will break down that team as well. But new name to the baseball program. It's a name that people might be a little familiar with. You might have known him as the starting quarterback last year, Jack Lausch. He was announced he's going to be playing baseball. That was his big sport coming up in high school. I mean, he was, I believe, the number 1 rated outfielder in Illinois and number 23 outfielder in the country his senior year at Brother Rice. It's a huge addition to the baseball program. I know he was originally going to Notre Dame to play baseball. And when Northwestern came in to offer him the football, he jumped in there. I think that's great. I mean, he's got this opportunity to play baseball as well. We've seen baseball, football crossover in the past. So it's not like it's going to be a big thing. And, presumably with Preston Stone coming in as the presumptive starter, Lausch probably will be taking a bit of a back seat or a different role, I would imagine, for this next season. So for him to get out there and play some baseball is going to be huge, especially if he continues to be as good as he was in high school. Maybe the majors, or maybe MLB will come sniffing as well.
Yeah, maybe. Certainly with hoping. We'd love to see that it all play out that way, right? I mean, I think it's great for a couple of reasons. One, obviously Northwestern baseball is getting a very good baseball player here, and that's fantastic. I also love the idea that this will probably put some more eyeballs on the Northwestern baseball team, right? I think Jack Lausch immediately becomes the most famous guy on that team, at least within the Northwestern community, right? Which will hopefully draw some eyes, we know that this is a team that really, went through some things, right? And now has a new coach, Ben Greenspan, and they are on the upswing. They had a couple big-time moments last year, a couple really dramatic wins. They're looking to continue that upward trajectory, and hopefully part of that is going to be pulling in more eyeballs and more fans in the stands, more success on the field. Lausch can help with all of that. So, yeah, it's a great thing to see.
Well, with that, we'll go ahead and leave it there for tonight. Head to our website, westlawpirates.com, where you can leave comments and questions. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, YouTube, pretty much anywhere on the socials at Westlaw Pirates. And you can always email the show, westlawpirates@gmail.com. Tune in next time as we give our visceral and statistical views on Northwestern athletics. And look for us in the west side of Ryan Field flying the red pirate flag, because we give no quarter, especially the fourth. For John Lacombe and Eric Skasbo, I'm Sam Walter. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.